Right, so to make your piping for your bag or your cushion or whatever, first of all you need to have some cotton cord. It comes in different thicknesses. I've gone for 1/4 meter thick, so you'll be able to see it on the camera. And basically you'll need, I generally say, for a bag with X amount of side, so if you've covered the front and the back, I generally say cut a fat quarter of fabric and put that to one side if you're wanting to make some piping. Also, my advice is to get some cord and just wrap it around the bag body and basically work out the measurement that you need. And obviously if you're doing the front and the back, you would times that by 2. And then I would also add an extra bit as well, so I would add another half again, just to be on the safe side, so to make sure that you've allocated enough piping for both. Same with a cushion, you just measure around all the way around, and obviously that's how much you need. And then I would add another, at least 1/4 to a cushion. Yeah, so yeah, let's get started. Right, so first of all you'll need fabric. I've just got under a fat quarter because I'm only going to show you on a small sample. I've got some fabric that I'm going to be sewing it on and showing you at the machine of how to actually sew that on. I've got my piping cord. Like I say, it comes in different millimeters. The latest bag pattern that's coming out next March, in March, it will be using piping cord of 4mm. This is, I think it's 5 or 6mm. I think it's actually a 5.5mm, which, to be fair, when I put it down on top of my rule, is actually 1/4 meter. You'll need your Rotary cutter or scissors, a marking tool, some pins, and obviously some cutting tools. So this is what you need to remember is, and you need to work out, so there is a bit of maths involved. Obviously you've got to measure around the object that you're going to be sewing the piping onto. But you also need to know how much fabric you need to be able to wrap around this this piping cord plus the seam allowance. So the rule of thumb is, so whatever this is, so this is 1/4 meter, you times that by 2, so that makes it 1/2 inch. And then you need to add your seam allowance. So for instance, I'm using a centimetre seam allowance, which is 3/8 of an inch. So you need to times that by 2. So 3/8 of an inch is 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 3/4 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, plus the 2 1/4 inches need to be added. So I'm going. So you're looking at 1 1/4 inch. So I personally like to go a bit extra and add 1/8, because sometimes I do find that sometimes I don't allocate exactly enough. So I'm going to do 1 1/4 plus 1/8 of an inch. So that's 1, 2, 3. So that's 1 inch and 3/8 that I'm going to be cutting my strips at. So the next thing you need to do is obviously get your fabric, and this is where I recommend having a rotary cutter and a mat, and a mat that's preferably got some 45-degree angles and some 30 and 60-degree angles, because we will use the 45-degree angle to actually cut your first cut. So right, so I'm making sure it's virtually straight. I know it wasn't cut straight to start off with when I bought it. And this line here and here, these two diagonal lines, is my 45-degree angle. So that wall's not going to be big enough. So I'm just going to pop my rule on to match up the two 45-degree angles on your mat. And I'm just going to cut my first line. Then what I tend to do is, if I make some space, now don't chuck that piece away because you can actually get 1 or 2 strips from that. I tend to actually move my fabric. I'm just going to fold it up like so, and then I'm going to make sure I've got it aligned, this fold here aligned upon one of the lines, and the straight edge that I've just cut folded up against this one line here. Now I said it needs to be 1 3/8 for my piping that I've chosen. So I'm going to cut 1 3/8 strips. I'm going to just do a couple. So that's 1. And that's 2. That should be enough for the amount of piping that I've allocated for this tutorial. Now don't chuck this away. Obviously you can still cut it when it's on the straight of grain, or you can keep it for other bias strips. The reason why we need it to be on the 45-degree angles, because it's got that stretch, which if you've got a curved corner on your bag or your cushion, which you tend to have on a cushion, it will naturally go round. If this was cut on the grain, on the straight, it won't go round any corners. Right, so let me just fold up this fabric. And like I say, you can get a few strips out of that as well, out of that one piece there. Right, so the next thing you will need to do is, now this is a bit like when you make binding, bias binding, this next bit, is when we join these two pieces together, you still need to make sure that you sew on the 45-degree angle, because if we were to sew these together, if we would sew these two pieces together straight, one will have a stretch as more than the other one. So you still need to sew these at an angle. So when I say at an angle, you need to lay one right side facing up and one right side facing down, and you need them to slightly overlap like so. Then you're going to get your quarters rule and your marking pen. Oh, let me just make sure that's straight. You gotta make sure you got them straight as well. So okay, so you're going to go from this corner here to that corner there, and we're going to draw a line from those two corners. And then the next thing you do is obviously pop a pin in that. Now that line there that you've just drawn here has now come a sewn line. So we're going to go to the machine. Because of the width of the binding that I've cut, I'm going to take it down to a stitch length 2, and I'm just going to stitch from one side to the other. You don't need to reverse stitch or anything like that. You just need to stitch from one corner to the next corner, and then I'll meet you back at the table. Right, so now I've sewn the binding together, the two binding strips, we need to cut off this excess here. To do that, you need to from the sewn line, you need to cut it so there is 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and then you've got 2 dog ears here, so I'm just gonna trim those off. Okay, so the next thing you need to do is take this to your ironing board and press this seam open and give the whole strip a good press after you've pressed all the seams open. I'll just finger press it for now. Right, so obviously my piping is smaller than my binding, but doesn't matter. I'm just going to trim off one end and obviously make sure it's neat. Right, so I'm going to go over to my sewing machine. I always have a bit overhanging at the start, and I only always put 1 clip in as well. So I'm matching, so I've laid the piping on the wrong side, and I'm just basically bringing the 2 edges together, and I pin it as close, I clip it as close as I can. And sometimes if I feel like the piping is moving around a bit, I just pop a clip over the binding, over the cord side as well. So I'm going to take this over to my machine and show you how I actually sew this together. You need to put on your machine your zip foot, or if you've got a piping foot, even better, but I only personally have a zip foot. So I'm going to put my zip foot onto my machine, and then basically I'm going to use a stitch length of 3, and I'm going to stitch right next to the piping, as close as I can get to that piping. The simple reason is we want that tight, a nice tight finish. You don't want to sew any further at this stage away from that cord, because it won't be tight, and basically you'll get ripples when you get around corners, or you will get ripples within your actual pieces when you sew it onto your actual garment. So yeah, I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. Right, you will see how I've actually put on my zipper foot, but my zipper foot is actually showing that it's in the centre, and I need it to come over to the left hand side here. So I'm just going to move my needle so it's all over the way on the left hand side. I'm just going to move that thread. Okay, so taking my piping, going to take that 1 clip off from now and just bring that down a bit. Now always, this is another reason why I add extra, is because the first bit's never going to go perfectly well. Could do, might not do. Right, so I'm always got my hand here holding and preparing the fabric for the next few inches, and I do it at a few inches at a time. Okay, so I'm just going to go slow, so I'm changing my my speed down to just going slow, just for the first few inches anyway, just to get yourself started. And once you get up the confidence, pick up the speed. Right, I'm going to stop there and lift up my foot and readjust anything that's coming apart, or if your 2 edges are not meeting. My 2 edges are still meeting. Okay, and I'm just going to keep rolling it here just to make sure It doesn't matter how long it takes you, it's not a race. Just to make sure you've actually got these two edges here meeting and the piping is in the center and your sewn line is really close to the piping cord. Right, so I'm just coming to the end of the piping and the end of the strip. Okay. You'll notice now you'll have a perfect piece of piping, and I know the two edges didn't match up there, but that's marginal compared to if it was a lot further than this, I would have actually unpicked all this and actually readjust the fabric and then carried on sewing, but that's just marginal. You can get away with that. So the next thing I actually do is I trim back the piping so it's up to the point where the strip actually starts, the bias strip, and I always unpick at least an inch to inch and a half of fabric of stitches that I've just sewn. There is a method in my madness here and I will explain. This is so we're generating the finished part of the piping. So I'm going just over an inch and I'm going to stop there. Trim back that thread on both sides. Then I'm going to peel back this and trim off this piping cord here to where I trimmed back. So now I need to make a neat edge. So I'm going to fold this over by ½ an inch. I'm just going to finger press it. And then we're just going to leave it as it is, let it roll naturally back into shape. Keep finger pressing it. And that's going to be where it hides the end of your piping once you've finished sewing it to your garment. So I've made a mock-up mini pillow, mini cushion here. So we need to attach this piping to the first piece of fabric. So I always start off on a straight edge or in the middle of an edge. I don't know why, I just always have them. Alright, so I'm going to clip that part in at the moment, and I'm just basically clipping this all the way around. Now, because I've got quite a bulky cord in here, just going to bunch it up, but there is something else you can do, is just slightly, wherever that's going to fall, just snip the binding piece a bit, and that should naturally go around that corner there. You're just going to make sure you actually get a clip in that corner too. Yeah. And once again I'm just going to do the same on this corner. Make sure there's a clip on that corner there. Oops. like so. And I'm going to go all the way around. And another clip. Last corner. Right, so you'll notice my piping is actually too big. So this part here, where we folded it over, you need to finger press of where the piping cord actually starts. We're going to lay this on top and work out where we need to snip. So I'm going to snip it where the ends. So, okay. Then we're going to open up this binding here, like so. Then we're going to pop this in there, like so, and then we're just going to fold that fabric over, and that will give you a really neat finished edge. Right, so on your sewing machine, you need to, just going to put one more clip there. Right, you need to sew on the actual seam, but we're not going to sew as close to the binding as we have sewn previously to attach the strip to the cord. What I tend to do is move my needle. So if I put my foot down to start off with, so yes, it's right next to the, let me just bring this down a bit. So yes, it's right next, my foot is right up against the piping cord, but I'm going to bring my needle back just, say, that's about 1/8 of an inch. So my needle's still going to be within this this slot of the piping foot here. Just making sure that's right. And I'm just going to sew all the way around using a shorter stitch length of a 2.4. And I'm going to go slow because I'm taking the clips out. Just going to slowly pivot around that edge. And carry on sewing. The reason why I'm not stitching as close to the piping is because I will show right, the reason why I'm not sewing that close to the piping cord is for when we come to sew it, I'll join it onto the next piece of fabric, because then we will move the needle to the other side of that sewn line. So I'm just going to carry on stitching all the way around and show you the next step. Right, so now I've sewn all the way around, I'm just going to show you how I would put this together, and then basically it's like you're sewing on a bag. It'd be a gusset to a front or back panel. So I'm just going to clip. I'm not going to show you the complete square because I think you will get the picture. So I'm matching up the edges. Right, so I basically want to get a corner in so you can see what happens. So now I actually flip this over, and as you can see I've got a sewn line all the way across, all the way around. There is a reason why I've used yellow thread. So at this point, when you're sewing the piping to the actual outer first piece, my advice is obviously you've got to move the needle, but also change to a different coloured thread. So when you actually come to this part, you can see your thread, your cotton or your polyester at this point. Because when we next sew this, we will move the needle back. So we are going to bring the needle right over to where the piping is. So the needle has moved past this sewn line here. So it's moved past this sewn line here, and I will stitch. Oh, let me make sure that's down. I will stitch right next to that piping cord. Going to lift up my foot. Fingers crossed. Right. So fingers crossed this has actually worked. So I'm going to fold this out. And there you go. You got your pipe in. So I could have got a bit closer there. So you can always go back in. Yeah, I could have. So I just will go back in now. Yeah, I'm a lot closer this time round. There you go. Yeah, that's perfect. So yeah, that's how you actually sew on binding. Obviously ignore this bit, I'm just demonstrating this part here. Let me just trim away that excess so it comes out a little bit better. That's better. That's better. Okay, so that is my way of how I do piping. So on a bag I would never use this thickness of piping cord, definitely on a cushion, but never on a bag. The maximum I would use on a bag is 4mm cord, not possibly even a 3mm cord. I really don't like seeing this much of piping on a bag, but that's personal choice. You might like it. But yeah, that's a quick and easy tutorial of how to make your own piping. It took me years to master, and to be honest, I'm not happy with how this is looking at the moment. I could probably gone and done a better job of it. So yeah, it's trial and error. So if you do like little mock-ups, this could have been a coaster at the end of it. So if you do little mock-ups, you will understand that it's basically mastering. It's basically how am I trying to say? What am I trying to say? It's basically trying to perfect it. Basically, it's a bit like me with my drawing. Drawing didn't come naturally. I practiced every day, and yeah, so just keep practicing. That's all I can keep saying. Now, in a couple of weeks, you'll notice piping cord will actually hit my shop, and I've bought the size that we use in bag making. So the links to that will be hitting the Facebook group and all over social media, and with alongside of interfacing and stabilizers, which will help you benefit of the new beginners and people that have never made bags. And yeah, so thanks ever so much for watching today. I'm sorry I couldn't be live, but I'm talking to you via typing. Anyway, hope you have a good weekend. Thank you. Bye.